Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Hello, my lovely listener friends. Welcome to the 6th episode of Delingpole, the podcast featuring me, James Delingpole, brought to you by the Breitbart News Network on Podcast One. Well, so much has happened since we last spoke, I can barely contain my excitement. Basically, I've spent the whole of the last week like a sea otter on MDMA, frisking and diving and gambling in my warm salt bath, made up of the sad and copious tears of all the tragic losers who were hoping Hillary would win the presidential election. And did you notice? She didn't win. Donald Trump won instead. And you know what? I really don't care if he turns out to be the worst president ever and presses the red button and launches a nuclear war that kills us all. It will all have been worth it just for the shits and giggles. The thing that has given me a special joy is the misery of the celebrities, the wankerati as I call them. I think I'm right in saying that apart from Clint Eastwood, Jesse Ventura and Jon Voight, nobody who is famous actually admitted they were rooting for Trump. Oh, I forgot. Piers Morgan. Piers rooted for Trump too, but only because Piers is a slime, a greasy courtier who sniffs the wind and knows which way his bread is buttered. He's like one of those cockroaches that will inherit the earth after the nuclear blast, a janitor of the apocalypse. Anyway, we could talk about this for hours and no doubt will in the coming weeks, months and years. This Trump presidency is going to be the gift that goes on giving. Especially when he goes to work on all those enviro-loons and troffers and bent scientists on the green gravy train. If you have stocks in the climate change industry, sell them now. It's all over. But that's for another episode. As the late, great David Bowie said, I'm happy, hope you're happy too. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to this week's special guest. Her name is Kate Andrews. She's an expatriate American living in London, working for the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a free market think tank. I've seen her on TV a lot, and I thought to myself, she'll be good to have on the show. She's pretty sound. And so she is, as you're about to find out now. Happy listening. Remember to give me a 5-star review on iTunes. You are listening to Delingpole, starring me, James Delingpole, brought to you by the Breitbart News Network and Podcast One.
Do you like scary radio dramas? Tune into Fangoria's Dread Time Stories, fully dramatized horror stories hosted by Malcolm McDowell.
Irony is only one small ingredient of these Dread Time Stories.
Hear a new episode every other week on the Podcast One app, iTunes, and PodcastOne.com.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
So given that it's just a few days after Trump's surprise victory in the presidential election, I thought I would find myself an actual American in London to analyse what happened, where it went wrong for Hillary, why it went right for Trump, and what the fallout's going to be. So, welcome, Kate Andrews.
Thanks for having me.
Kate is the news editor at the
Yeah.
Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a sort of right-wing, a free market think tank.
That's what we like to call it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that right-wing is used as a pejorative by the left.
We published a book about BBC bias a few months back, and my colleague Ryan Bourne goes through and finds some really important examples of how think tanks with a free market perspective are so much more often labeled Thatcherite, center-right, right-wing. Whereas think tanks that take a more Keynesian perspective are called independent, educational.
Do they really use that word, independent?
Oh, yeah, and more frequently than they would for us, which kind of shows that inherent bias, I suppose. So, yes, I mean, we're a free market think tank, and we often like to surprise people when we come out in favor of immigration and come out in favor of a lot of, classically liberal things that people don't necessarily associate with the IEA.
I'm enjoying these times perhaps even more than I should do. I mean, I'm just every day I just look at my
wake up with glee.
I look at my Twitter feed and I see the wailing and gnashing of teeth of people like David Aronovich, the Times commentator. He's been having a Twitter spat this morning with various people on my Trumpian side of the argument. And what's very clear, reading his Twitter feed and also doing interviews with the BBC, they simply do not get it. They do not understand why it is that somebody who they consider sexist and racist and generally objectionable like Trump could have become president. What happened? Can you... I know you're not personally a massive Trump fan, but maybe you can explain sort of what happened?
Yeah, so I sometimes feel like I'm kind of living in this in-between world where I will agree with many of those commentators. I do find many of his comments deeply sexist, arrogant, xenophobic, one of the many reasons I'm not supporting him. But I understand why he won. And I think that's the crucial difference, is that a lot of these people have just sort of thrown their head in the sand saying, oh no, how has this happened? Well, it's happened because there were millions upon millions of people who quietly, for probably the better part of 2 decades, have just seen their entire lives and the way that they live slip away. They've seen their communities deteriorate. They've seen all of the manufacturing jobs leave. All the small businesses that were based around those manufacturing jobs leave. They've got kids. They don't necessarily have the money to send their kids to college to get out of that town to do something different. They feel hopeless. And so much of the rhetoric coming from the Democrats is, well, we're going to further shut down those manufacturing jobs. We're going to further take away this lifestyle that you live, and we're going to move towards green energy and clean energy. And, I'm a big fan of green energy personally, but I'm not living in rural Pennsylvania just listening to people who don't seem to care about my livelihood whatsoever. And they really messed up with that rhetoric, and they weren't sympathetic to their core voters, that white working class Democrat vote, who said, what's changed? Why are you threatening my job without any alternative for how you're going to make it better? And those people were quiet, they were peaceful, they lined up on voting day, and they came out and they voted for Donald Trump.
Isn't it interesting that he did really well in the coal states? And I want to flash back a moment to the dread Obama era, when Obama made a speech about how how energy prices were going to necessarily skyrocket. And he wasn't saying that in a bad way.
No.
He actually wanted the cost of energy to increase for the consumers, because this was a sign that we were ditching nasty fossil fuels and adopting clean energy. And it never occurred to him, did it, that blue-collar, traditionally Democrat voting states, like Pennsylvania, might think, well, actually, I want to earn a living.
This is what so deeply frustrates me about Barack Obama and his view on politics, is that he could come out and say something like that, and in his mind, the support of green energy had to go along with, and someone's going to pay for it, and you're going to pay for it with your money, your salary, and your job. As a free marketeer, I believe that green energy is the future. We're not going to get there by subsidizing big green energy companies who go bust, by wasting billions of... Solyndra. And we're not going to do it by subsidizing to the billions and watching them go bust. It's going to be some kid, some young woman or man in their garage who comes up with the technology that we're going to need to make the world a greener place. And you need to do that by investing in markets and by allowing that competition to thrive. So I have no problem with Obama preaching green energy. I have a problem with the way that he seemed to think that, the poor working class people had to pay for his dream of making green energy a reality. And people were fed up. They could barely afford their energy bills now, let alone what Obama wanted to do to them. I've also been very frustrated. I was seeing some of Paul Mason's tweets, for example, about how the only way Donald Trump has won is because the racist, misogynistic vote came out. Again, I find a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric deeply worrying and very offensive, but I will not say that all of his voters feel the same way or voted for him for those reasons. The numbers aren't there. The evidence isn't there.
Did you by any chance listen to the finest hour of comedy on Radio 4 in a very long time? BBC Radio 4 Woman's Hour.
I did not catch that.
The day of the result. And they were very, very upset that that women did not understand that if you possess a vagina, you absolutely have to vote for the candidate who's got a vagina, not the one without one. I mean, this was the logic.
It turns out that women in the States didn't believe that logic. So Donald Trump won the white women vote who did not have a college degree by something like over 20 points. He ended up winning the African American vote by 1 percentage more than Mitt Romney did in 2012. He won the Hispanic vote by 2 percentages more than Mitt Romney did in 2012. He still didn't do very well with those demographics.
Yeah.
They still, overwhelmingly did go for Clinton. But the point here is that he didn't lose them in comparison to Mitt Romney, who was incredibly tame, incredibly polite, and never insulted those groups. This ended up being an election about class and about where you feel you stand in the world and how the political elites relate or overwhelmingly don't relate to you. And for all of Hillary Clinton's attempts, even when she was running against Bernie Sanders in the primary, to make this about the female vote, to make this about sexism, to suggest any criticism levied against me is about my sex and my gender, not about me, failed. It failed dramatically. And, I was never going to be happy on Wednesday morning, whether it was Trump or Clinton, who was going to be the president-elect. But one of the silver linings of a Trump presidency will be the fact that that kind of gender baiting, got a slap in the face. It did. I
want to talk to you about that, more about that in a moment. But there was a glorious instance on the Woman's Hour when they had a very articulate, very measured Republican woman who was a Trump supporter. And she said, women are not sex objects. And what she meant by that was we're not so dumb that we can just be bought off with all this rhetoric. We actually care about other stuff besides our vaginas and about this stuff about glass ceilings. Some of us actually care about economics. And as you say, it was economics, wasn't it, really, when it came down to it? People thought, am I going to be more prosperous in the next 4 years under Trump or under Hillary?
And it did, yes. It came down to the economics and Donald Trump's policies, which is quite incredibly ironic because I think you and I would both have to agree that this was not an election about policy. It was very much an election about personality. But I think at the end of the day, it did come down to policies. Now, again, I'm kind of speaking objectively here. I don't like a lot of Donald Trump's policies. They're big government, big spending. He wants to do a relatively large stimulus package, not as large as Barack Obama's in 2008, but still very substantial. I don't like his position on free trade. I don't like his position on immigration. So I'm not feeling great, but I do recognize that these kinds of policies resonated with people in the Rust Belt, and that is why he won.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm much more pro free trade than Trump is, and I worry about we're going to get more of the Keynesian experiment. But I also wonder whether anyone else could have won on a different ticket. You and I are not going to get our wish list because we are free marketeers. We're classical liberals. I'm not sure that somebody, if he'd campaigned on a classical liberal ticket, whether that message would have resonated to quite the degree with the Rust Belt that Trump's message did. And I also wonder whether this wasn't the presidential election that saved our asses, because I was beginning to worry, as I'm sure you've been too, that as the share of the US economy owned by the public sector has increased to the point where it's exceeded 50% of the US economy is now sort of public sector. That's the point where you get this client class of people who are beholden to the state and therefore are going to vote for whichever government promises more government spending. Yep. So I reckon this was almost the last chance we had to claw back.
I hope you're right. So I just keep looking for silver linings. I write a fortnightly column for City AM on the U.S. presidential elections, and my last article before the election was, what are the silver linings of either one of them? And, to speak to that point, but also a slightly broader one, with Hillary Clinton, you knew what you were getting, and it wasn't good.
It was more of the same.
It was more of the same with Barack Obama, and even though his approval ratings are quite high, and I think that speaks to his integrity as a person, and the fact that these two candidates were so disliked, his policies have not been popular. unpopular. His signature piece of legislation, Obamacare, remains deeply unpopular with the electorate, and I'm very excited to see that repealed and replaced with something better that actually gets people decent health care at a cheaper cost. But, I think the huge question mark around Donald Trump, which you're clearly very optimistic about, and I'm more hesitant, is what is to come. It's so unpredictable. Is Donald Trump going to drain the swamp, as he says, and throw out all of the elites in D.C. and, slash the public sector and get things back to something less bureaucratic and more workable? Is he going to do that? Is he going to be moderate when it comes to free trade, moderate when it comes to immigration, great on tax reform? Or is he going to blow up with world leaders and be incredibly inappropriate and damage our relationships abroad? Is he going to be heavy-handed and hot-tempered when it comes to foreign interventions? Is he really going to go down this populist route and veto every bill from Paul Ryan in the House because it's just not Keynesian enough? We don't know. It's unpredictable. No. And so her predictability was worrisome. His unpredictability is worrisome. I'm glad you're optimistic. I'm slightly less so, but it's just this huge question mark. We just don't know.
Yes, he is rather the blank mirror on which we're projecting all our fantasies.
Made me laugh and dribble my coffee.
Sorry, yeah. So I suppose I must be a natural optimist because
yes, I suppose you are.
And I have to say, being a natural optimist, if you follow politics, is not a good position to be in. I remember when.
No, you're always disappointed.
Do you remember when the appalling, so disappointing David Cameron? If there was one thing David could absolutely reliably do every single time, it was disappoint. And I remember when he promised the bonfire of the Quangos, all these kind of government bodies which were going to be slashed because obviously they were run by kind of leftist infiltrators and wasting massive amounts of taxpayers' money on complete tripe. And was there even a kind of slight fizzle of the Quangos? I didn't see any of them.
If you think David Cameron is bad, let's think about poor George Osborne, who, took on this title of the austerity chancellor. Everyone, on the right was praising him, but on the left was bashing him for being the austerity chancellor. Our tax and growth report of the IEA that just came out about 2 weeks ago looks at how much of government spending was actually cut over those 5 years.
Tell me.
Do you want to guess?
How much government spending was
in percentage terms between 2010 to 2015? How much overall government spending do you think was cut?
I'm guessing maximum 5%.
That's very generous of you. 0.5% per year. 0.5% per year on average was cut between 2010 to 2015. 0.5. So here's George Osborne saying, I am the austerity chancellor, taking all the heat that comes with that. But, he cut 0.5% a year. Now, please don't get me wrong. You, as a listener, can disagree with where he cut from. He didn't touch pensions. He gave a lot away to sort of a wealthier, older class of people. And they slash, obviously, things related to university and disability benefits, and they went after tax credits, or at least they tried to. So we can disagree about where he was cutting from, and you can still say, well, there was pain here. But 0.5% a year for someone who was deemed the austerity chancellor is a ridiculous title.
I've often wondered about the rationale behind that, because Osborne, we know, is a Machiavel. His model is the Lord of Darkness, Peter Mandelson. Now, you would have thought that an astute Machiavellian guide would have shown Osborne a strategy to outwit us. Now, how is it sensible to have this public reputation as a complete bastard while at the same time being a complete kitten? Surely the sensible thing would be the opposite. George Osborne, the voters' friend, being generous while secretly getting away with all this incredible rationalisation of the sclerotic tax system.
There were no radical cuts in that sense. Again, you can argue from certain sectors more was cut than should have been.
The military was pared to the bone.
But otherwise, and when you look at that total amount of expenditure, very little was cut. My worry, though, and I'm actually deeply concerned about this going forward in the UK, is that the attitude, especially on the left, is that austerity is what has damaged this country. Yes. Any bad position we're in is because of austerity. We need more spending. Well, actually, when you look at how much was cut, and it was very, very minor, clearly the issues have nothing to do with money. right? Like, most of that money is still there because it was never cut. Clearly, there are structural issues that need to be reformed. I'm thinking particularly about the NHS.
Or what?
But these bodies like the NHS, these beasts really need to be dramatically reformed, because it's not about a lack of money. It is about a government that thinks that it can not only fund but also run these vital institutions. And bureaucracies are really not cut out to do that. But because this idea of austerity has been perpetuated and the population thinks it's happened, everyone thinks more money is the answer, when actually it's much deeper than that.
Kate Andrews, I am so enjoying this conversation. We'll have more in a moment.
Stay tuned for 60-second AP News headlines.
AP Update, I'm Diane Kepley. Questions are swirling in Washington about the contacts between Trump administration officials and the Russians.
Was General Flynn directed or authorized to do what he did? What was the extent of his conversations and contacts with Russia? Who else from the Trump administration, transition, or campaign had contact with the Russians?
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and others are calling for an independent investigation to get the answers to those questions. There is pushback from President Trump. This morning, he's lashing out at the news media, saying the fake news media is going crazy with what he calls their conspiracy theories and blind hatred. He adds in his tweet, the Russian connection nonsense is an attempt to cover up mistakes made in Hillary Clinton's losing campaign. Meantime, in Moscow, a Kremlin spokesman is denying reports about intercepted phone calls between intelligence officials and members of the Trump presidential campaign. AP Update.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
So, welcome back to my podcast guest, Kate Andrews. Kate, I'm having quite a lot of women on my shows, sound right-wing or free market women. And I think one of the reasons I so love having women on my show is because they can say things that I can't, particularly about stuff like feminism and about the gender pay gap, which is it's like Father Christmas. It's like I'll love you in the morning. No, I won't come in your mouth.
It's oh dear. It's like a talking point that is perpetuated by people who are often making a lot of money or developing their careers out of this idea that women still need to feel like victims in 2016 in the workplace. So a few disclaimers. Obviously, sexism is still, I think, quite strong in different areas in the UK.
We'll talk about that in a moment. You say,
okay,
you believe in sexism. Okay, right.
Yeah, I believe in sexism. Okay. I think it is real. I don't think that's Father Christmas.
Am I a sexist?
Are you a sexist? I would never accuse you of that. So I've one incredibly important point. When people start throwing around words like racism and sexism, like we were saying earlier about, Trump supporters, I get so very angry because those words are like the worst things you could accuse anyone of, and you need to use them when it's actually true, because we've been diminishing those words. Mitt Romney was called a racist, a sexist, a murderer. And then in 2016, when someone with some borderline really questionable views did come along, I think a lot of those voters thought the media was crying wolf. Because, if Mitt Romney was a sexist, of course they're going to call Donald Trump a sexist. And we've really discredited those words, so I don't use them casually.
Yeah.
I will say that.
Do you know what, Kate? My wife actually used it on me the other day. Do you know why?
What'd you do? Did you deserve it?
Well, no, I totally didn't. Basically, there's some sort of event at my daughter's school where they have to decide what A-levels they're going to do, and you go from table to table and you get the teachers telling you why to study this particular A-level. And I sort of didn't want to go because it sort of clashed with a Christmas party or something.
Right.
And so when I was sort of negative about it, my wife said, "You're so sexist. You do this for your son, but not for your daughter." And it so totally wasn't that. I adore my daughter. I mean, I think any father will tell you that we love our little girls. They are the best thing on earth because they're the one woman who loves us unconditionally. Well, at least until they turn 13, in which case, after which point all bets are off. But yeah, we love our girls.
Let me ask you this: if your daughter comes home and she says, "Well, I want to take economics, biology, and maths," what are you going to say?
Oh, I'd be overawed.
All right. Well, then I think you're exempt from the sexist comment this time.
I would totally love it. Although, having said that, I once went, and I disgraced myself in a good way, I think. I was invited by a girls' private school to go and address a dinner of the sixth form girls. And this school had one of those go-ahead headmistresses who was really bought very much into the feminist agenda, and felt that she'd had a transformative effect on the school. And she was boasting to me about how many STEM subjects the girls were reading at A-levels, and they all wanted to go, and this girl's going to read astrophysics, and this one wants to be a welder, and this one wants to be a whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm totally up for girls doing whatever they want to do. I'm totally up for equality. No glass ceilings and stuff. At the same time, I do believe that there are certain areas that girls are more naturally predisposed towards. Men and women are different. And I'm not sure that it's healthy where you're steering girls towards things that they necessarily don't want to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, men and women are different. I don't really buy into this idea, especially when it comes to academic subjects, that their interests have to be all that different. I think probably two areas overall in the feminist movement that I agree with are, one, really pushing to young women that they can pursue any kind of career that they want, not forcing it on them. I agree with you there. You don't just want to be able to have a token girl coming through your school who's going to become a welder so you can feel good about yourself. That's ridiculous. You have to be asking these young women in the same way you'd ask men, what do you want to pursue with your life? What's meaningful to you? And any answer that boys or girls come up with is fine by me. The other area is shared parental leave. I don't support paternity leave necessarily. I don't think you should force men or force women to take the time off. I think couples, a man and a woman, two women, two men, whatever, should decide between themselves when a kid comes into the world who wants to take that time off. Now, I believe it's in countries like Sweden where you do have things like shared parental leave. The women take the majority of the time off. That's great because they're making that choice. I just like the choice to be here in the UK to begin with.
Oh, can I call you Jermaine Greer?
No, you may not.
Jermaine Greer's more feminist younger sister. Have you got
more feminist than Jermaine Greer? Wow,
no,
that's amazing.
You are sounding, for this podcast, you're sounding dangerously radical. Have you got children?
No, I don't.
No. Okay. Well, I can tell you, speaking as a dad, that we love our kids, but we're kind of a bit shit about dealing with them. I mean, when you look at
sounds like parenthood.
When you look at a father playing with his children in the playground, the dad is on his iPhone. It's really, really boring looking at small children. And also, it's an awesome responsibility which you're not really up to as a man. I mean, the number of times I've lost... Wait, hear me out.
Well, then don't have kids. Don't have kids if you don't think you're up to it.
The dad does other good things. The dad teaches children to be irresponsible. I used to take my children walking across ice-covered lakes and teaching them to ignore the safety sign put up by the health Nazis in the park. I'm happy with that. I swing them around till their arms and legs almost drop off. This is cool. This is what dads do. Dads are risk takers. But I'm afraid to say we are not fit to be left looking after children on our own. Very few of us.
Well, then you definitely... then if you really believe that, you definitely shouldn't be committed to having them. I mean, let me put it to you this way. As classical liberals, as free marketeers, it all comes down, or should come down to both of us, for people doing what they want to do. If you want to have kids, great.
But I don't look after children.
Okay, well then you need to find a partner, and perhaps you have.
Just a normal woman.
Well, hold on. No, not a normal. I cannot speak to your personal life. But if you are a man who wants to have kids, wants absolutely no responsibility in raising those kids, or no responsibility, especially when they're little, to look after them all the time, you need to find a partner who's cool with that. And if you and your partner are cool with that, I have no comment on it. But my point, my incredibly important point, is that as a woman who doesn't have kids yet...
She's pointing a finger at me.
Oh, yeah. I'm pointing at the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pointing at your listeners.
Yeah.
As a woman who doesn't have kids yet, who would like to one day, but has absolutely no plans to take on that responsibility more than 50%, because I believe it is a shared job, I want the option to share my parental leave with my partner, and nobody else should be able to have a comment on that. Like, I'm not going to comment on you and your setup and whether or not you're home 90% of the time or 1% of the time or 10% of the time or whatever. But I should also have the option. I'd hope you'd think, as a free marketeer, that I and my partner should have the private option to decide who's in the best position to take that time off work. Why would you want to deny another couple who has nothing to do with you that opportunity?
Division of labour and comparative advantage.
So just want to be clear, you are willing to assert that you know how labor should be divided and comparative advantage for every single couple out there that has nothing to do with you? So if my future husband were a PhD student who was sitting at home writing anyway, you don't think that he should be able to stay home with the kid and I should be able to go back to work?
I think you should be allowed to trade off the... I think the default assumption should be that the woman should get the parental leave, not the man, and that she should be able to give her parental leave in special circumstances.
But again, if you believe that is the comparative advantage for women, and I don't necessarily, but I'm just hypothetically speaking, if you believe that...
so feminist, Kate. I'm very... feisty.
I love being called feminist. It happens so rarely. Usually I'm being screamed at
as feel good in
as
that
a men's rights activist, which I'm not either.
That cynical man way.
I can't win on either side. But no, I really want to confirm this. So you really believe that as a private couple in a private setting that has no effect on your life whatsoever, we shouldn't at least have the option to divide up how we want to spend time with that kid?
Probably like you, I'm very, very reluctant to impose on business regulations which force them to pay out for unproductive labour. I mean, for women or men to take time off work at the taxpayer's expense. It's unfair on people who haven't got children. It's unfair on economic growth, etc., etc., etc. But I would concede that maybe if you've got this kind of genius PhD student who's better off at home, male, looking after the baby while the woman goes out and works for her high-powered law firm, that makes sense. Although, mind you, she's probably earning so much money from her high-powered law firm anyway that why is this guy even getting parental leave money? That seems to be wrong. Anyway, but look, now you've established...
But that's a completely fair point. But let's just slightly extend that to the fact that every situation is different. And every family is a different setup. And I think that the biggest thing holding women back in their careers has nothing to do with employer sexism. Has nothing to do with this very mythical statistic that women are earning 86 pence to the pound that men earn. Certainly not true. It mostly comes down to the fact that women take time off of work to have kids. A lot of women want to do that. That's fantastic. They should. They're trading that pay in the future for equally meaningful parts of life by staying at home. That's great. But for the minority of women who don't want to do that and who want to work with their partners, have a different setup, let them. Why wouldn't we let them?
Given that the statistics support the fact that there is no real inequality, there's no gender pay gap effectively anymore, is there?
The statistics do not point to any kind of employer sexism. Again, just to give a little disclaimer, this does not mean that there are not instances in the world where employers are sexist towards their female employees. We have laws for that, and if any woman thinks she's experienced that, I would highly suggest that she takes that to court. But no, when you break down the gender pay gap, women in the UK between the ages of 22 to 39 on average earn more than their male counterparts.
What?
Yeah.
It's outrageous. Why?
Well, it's pretty darn equal, actually, isn't it? They're earning, on average, I think it's something like 0.8% more, 0.8% more, so, or close to 1%. So, on the whole, things have actually really equaled out. When you see that big dip, it's when childcare is coming into play. It's when women are taking time out of the workforce, and we just had that big discussion, so we don't need to get back into it. No. There may be some question marks around the pressure put on women to take that time out, but many, many women want to. And so to suggest that comes down to inherent employer sexism is absolutely ridiculous.
Given that this is so, why... I almost know the answer to this question, but why is the liberal left so... How does it get away with going on putting out this nonsense? Why does no one call them on it? Why do they get away with it?
I have two answers. I have a nice one and a mean one.
Yeah.
So I think if we're being very generous to people who still argue in favor of these numbers, argue that there's gender discrimination in the workplace, I think that women on a day-to-day basis, and again, don't start screaming feminism, but this is true. Women on a day-to-day basis feel sexism from all different parts of life. Whether it's being catcalled on the street, whether it's the fact that you really do think about the fact that you're walking home alone in the dark. Women are experiencing these things, and we really don't like it. It's not nice. When you get
older, you'll want to be catcalled.
I promise you I won't.
You don't know. It's awful getting old.
I would love to be 22 forever, which I've already passed.
Enjoy the catcalls.
But let me tell you, there's nothing nice about being shouted to by a group of men who are much larger than you in the middle of the night. There's nothing nice about it. And I think that a lot of these women who take up the equal pay day stats and who take up the gender pay gap stats are frustrated about other areas in life where they feel women aren't equal. And so they push this because they're just trying to help women, even though I think they're going down the wrong path and doing it in the wrong way. The generous side of me says they really are just trying to flag up the issues of sexism that still exist.
That's the nice
That's
excuse.
the nice
What
one.
now? Give me the nasty one, which is what you really want.
Well, it's just deeply political, isn't it? Making women into victims, making women feel like they don't have a leg to stand on, like their employers hate them, like men around them don't value them, making them feel like the only person they can go to is that feminist, radically left-wing advocate who's saying, you are a victim, come here, I'll take care of you, is a very lucrative business for a lot of people. And that's a real shame, because in 2016, women in the workplace are not victims, we're actually killing it.
Isn't that ironic that these people who are putting out this message purport to be sympathetic to women and caring about them and their plight, but actually they're harming women's self-esteem, they're creating a sense of victimhood, making women feel worse about themselves, which cannot be good for...
It's tough. I mean, everyone loves Jennifer Lawrence, right? I mean, I don't agree with her politics, but like American Hustle, she's just stole. I mean, Jennifer Lawrence is an absolutely amazing actress. And so when Jennifer Lawrence comes out and starts saying things about the pay gap, you know, she argued, well, I was paid less than my male colleagues for American Hustle. You know, she doesn't flag up the fact that she was a supporting actress, so maybe that has something to do with it. Also, Jennifer Lawrence was not trying to negotiate her salary. Her team of, I'm sure, many high-powered men and women were negotiating her salary. And if they failed to get her the best price they could, well, that's on them, and she should probably fire them. But the idea that, again, this is an example of employer sexism is ridiculous, but so many young women out there in particular look up to Jennifer Lawrence, and they see her do this, and they feel bad. They feel like, well, if it's happening to J-Law, of course it's happening to me, and I'm helpless, and I can't do anything about it. And it perpetuates this terrible cycle of women being made to feel like victims, so they follow this path down more and more and more, and I think it hurts them overall in the workplace.
People like my daughter. I mean, I get a glimpse into the sort of stuff that 16-year-olds are looking at on social media, because I get briefing sessions from my daughter, and she worships Taylor Swift.
Me too.
And Taylor Swift hangs out with this posse, including Lena Dunham.
She's in there.
And you've got Beyonce sort of encouraging this kind of black-white tension in that song that she sang at the Super Bowl. What was that? She went all kind of I forget what it was.
Yeah, I'm genuinely not sure.
Yeah, but I suppose what I'm saying, I've just written a piece about this actually for the Sun, talking about how Hillary was reliant on this whole mob of celebrities, of everyone in Hollywood apart from Clint Eastwood and Jesse Ventura.
Yeah, there were a few outliers, but everyone was Team Hill.
John Voight, the token Oscar winner, Best Actor Oscar winner. But apart from that, everyone was all the wankerati, as I call them, all the world's celebs were pushing this message of victimhood. And by the way, this also applies to anti-bullying. I was talking to Claire Fox about this a few podcasts ago.
She's great. That
she pointed out the number of celebrities like Tom Cruise who've come out about the suffering they had at school as a result of bullying. And the message this sends out to the kids is, if you're bullied, it's kind of a good thing, because you too can become this victim and triumph over it, and it makes you special. This climate, again, I think explains why Trump won. That ordinary people are sick to the back teeth of this culture.
Particularly on the issue of the celebrities that endorse Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's not, Miley Cyrus was running around college campuses in this outrageous feather headpiece, in this outrageous outfit, taking lots of selfies. I hope
it wasn't Indian headdress.
No.
That would be cultural appropriation.
There was no cultural appropriation going on, but she was running around in these outrageous outfits, taking lots of selfies with students. Basically just, in her speeches and in her endorsements of Hillary Clinton, just making fun of those people out in the Rust Belt who will never have as much money as she does, never have the fame that she does, never have the life that she does. And she had, these celebrities basically had the audacity to make fun of Trump supporters who are sitting there looking at her in this outrageous feather headpiece and thinking, I've had enough of this, Miley Cyrus. Why are you making fun of me? Why are you being mean about me? If Miley Cyrus actually wanted to help Hillary Clinton win, she would have gone and knocked on doors in the Rust Belt, would have played with some kids in trailer parks, would have actually spoken to those people and said, look, I am a celebrity. I know, I care about you. Even though we have nothing in common, I care about you. Maybe that would have helped Hillary Clinton win. But these celebrities going to college campuses, wearing outrageous outfits and making fun of Trump supporters really had a huge backlash. Huge.
It was interesting. On the day that the election result came through, the BBC ran an item. It came from, I think, some sort of trucking company in New Jersey. And you met the guy who runs the company, a big sort of burly Chris Christie looking guy, and again, a slightly overweight woman behind the counter who does the accounts and stuff. And she was saying, "Well, I'm voting Trump because I want my children to feel safe. I'm worried about terrorism and stuff." And this guy was saying, "Well, I want Trump because he cares about businesses like ours." And my wife said to me, "Why did we never see any of these people interviewed during the campaign by the BBC? The BBC pretended they didn't exist." And I think now the BBC is affecting surprise and wondering, why did we get it so wrong? Well, you didn't go looking.
Yeah, I've got kind of mixed feelings about this. So I did a lot of commentary with the BBC and other outlets here in the UK leading up to the election. And I wasn't a Trump supporter, so I totally acknowledge that I'm already in that camp of the people perhaps that you think they spent too much time with. I think that they gave a pretty fair nod to Donald Trump when it came to spokespeople, pundits, people basically of the elite, whether they're on the left or the right, where I think most media outlets, not just the BBC, but most media outlets across the board did fail, was to speak to just normal Trump supporters on the ground. Almost all the clips I saw were really looking for the most outrageous Trump supporter they could find.
Yes, they did.
And that doesn't add up with most of the reports coming from the nationals in the U.S., people who did follow the Trump campaign around and go to the rallies. I mean, most of those reports were like, yeah, I went to a Trump rally ready to get beat up. No, none of that happened. All of these reports are actually people were lovely and very nice. And, there were people who were minorities in the crowd and they did not feel unsafe. Most of the reports suggested that Trump supporters were just pretty normal people who were fed up. I think the nationals got that right. Most of the broadcasters, not just the BBC, but a lot of them really were looking for something outrageous to show on television.
Yeah.
Because it's good TV, though, isn't it? I mean, this is not unique. This is good. This is how I think a lot of the news is viewed these days.
It's good TV for a certain type of constituency, the kind of constituency that wants to believe this shit. I mean, I don't think it represents people, license fee payers like me, for example. I mean, we're just. I know Americans don't have to pay license fees, but we are. The BBC is supposed to be an impartial.
Well, I pay the license fee. I'm a resident here in the UK. I pay the license fee. I mean, I do think that the mandatory license fee is outrageous. It should be voluntary. It should be more like a Netflix subscription kind of setup.
You get better value from Netflix.
I would pay for the BBC license fee, though, if it were an option, which I think it should be. I don't think anyone should have to buy it. Yeah. I would pay for it because I don't think that I'm probably in this building on the side that feels less so like the BBC is inherently biased. I actually think they're pretty good usually at getting that free market perspective on air.
I would pay for the BBC license too, but I think if it were voluntary, I think it might actually have a different effect on the BBC's output. I think
very possibly.
If they were essentially free market,
mm-hmm.
I think that they would be much more careful about not alienating people like me and you, even though now we've established that you are actually quite violently left-wing.
Radical, emotional liberal.
Just one more thing before we go, because I've been loving this conversation, and I could talk for another hour, but I think listeners...
It's been great.
It's been good. How crap was President Obama? I mean, he really was. He has to be one of the worst presidents in US history, doesn't he?
Well, speaking of Claire Fox earlier, I was invited to the Battle of Ideas this year, which I just think might be one of the best conferences, certainly in the UK.
Organised by lefties. It's so weird. Well, I mean,
I don't think. I think she'd be very upset that you said that.
No, she loves.
Does she?
Oh, yes,
okay,
she does.
good. Well, yes.
Lefty feminist. Is
yes, and I'm an emotional feminist, so it all adds up, doesn't it? No, I mean, it's really excellent if you truly want debate. If you want people with different ideas on the stage fighting it out, that's where you go. And so I was really honored to be asked to speak. And my panel was. The title was great. Bye Bye Barack, Worst President Ever? ? And so I was on this particular topic, and my argument, which I'm sticking by, was no, he's not the worst president ever.
What?
Well, I mean, you're comparing him to Jimmy Carter and Richard Nixon, right? He's not the worst president ever. I do think he is a contender, though, for the title of the president with most wasted potential. There are some huge disappointments from this Obama administration. Of course, from his perspective, the fact that Obamacare is about to be repealed just gets rid of the only signature piece of legislation that he managed to pass. But my huge disappointment with him comes truly down to the fact that he wasn't truthful about his desire to unite the country. This might have been the first president ever who could have actually taken on issues like school choice and who could have actually gotten better education for minority kids.
Because he's black, he could have actually put through legislation which healed the racial divisions, which in a way a white person couldn't have done.
Well, I certainly think that his race and the fact that he was black would have helped that, but not just that. I mean, he's a great orator, great communicator. He's very solidly a Democrat, and the teachers' unions are one of the biggest funders to the Democrat Party. Yeah. So the fact that he could represent those minority children, but also because he had an in with the teachers' unions, I don't think it's so simple to say that it comes down to his race, but there were a lot of factors there that meant that he could have really gotten kids who just have a terrible education at the moment a much better shot, and he decided to take the side of the unions, and that's just so disappointing, isn't it?
How likely is it that a liberal, a progressive, is ever going to talk sense on education? Because actually their view on education is the antithesis of what we free market people. I mean, Common Core, look at Common Core.
Yeah, I am very hopeful, actually. I mean, it's a minority group, but a good solid group of Democrats in Congress who are recognizing the importance of school choice because they really do care about the constituencies that they claim they represent. They really do care about the poor. And I think as states like Louisiana, like Nevada are bringing this in and we're seeing the success stories, a lot of those parents in other states are going to start to campaign for things like school choice to come in. I'm actually quite hopeful, but Barack Obama could have made massive progress there. And, he disappointed. He failed to do so. But,
to be fair to him, he did have beautiful skin tone and a lovely speaking voice. That's what I'll take away from Obama's presidency.
I would give him much more than that.
And what? Come on.
Well, I mean, I have spent a solid 8 years, and about 3 of those 8 years actually publicly on media bashing his policies. So, if you're going to call me a radical, emotional feminist, certainly don't call me a Barack Obama supporter. But this terrible 18 months of an election that we just experienced, I think has highlighted the importance of integrity in a president. And I do not condone almost all of Barack Obama's policies, but I give him a lot of credit for his integrity, the fact that he is scandal-free, the fact that he's a
style, not content.
Yeah, the fact that he's a family man, but it's so much more than just to say, he's a handsome man and he speaks well. I mean, he really resonated with people and he gave people optimism and hope. It is a huge disappointment that he let them down. But the man's got integrity, and I think he's probably a very good person. And I know you're more optimistic than I am, but I hope Trump can rise to the office. I do think Obama rose to the occasion of the office. I think George W. Bush did. I don't think Bill Clinton did, but I think Ronald Reagan did. Even when I disagree with someone, I can still recognize that they rose to the office.
Well, Kate, I think we should have another chat in about, 4 years' time and see who's right. I'm optimistic about Trump. I think he's going to be a lot better than Obama, who set the bar pretty low.
Well, now that he's president-elect, I'm incredibly hopeful we're going to get some decent, free market tax reform. I'm very hopeful that certain things are going to be implemented. As a president in 4 years' time, yes, we will chat and see what exactly went down.
Kate Andrews, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, it's fun.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Remember to give me a 5-star review on iTunes. You were listening to Delingpole, starring James Delingpole with my special guest, Kate Andrews, brought to you by the Breitbart News Network and Podcast One. Till next week, goodbye, my friends.